Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Talk Junkies, where tonight's going to be a very interesting night, as it is each and every single week here at Talk Junkies. If you haven't checked out last week's podcast, I did have Morley Robbins on the podcast, where we talked about minerals, including copper, iron, and magnesium, and those effects on the human body, and how it's kind of short-sold to the American people. It's something that I was really never aware of. I haven't got a chance to dive into his book yet, but I did purchase it from Amazon. It should be coming in the mail soon. And Morley, I'm going to check that out. And thanks for joining Talk Junkies, man. I had a great time with you. And eventually I'll do that blood test, man, and we'll see how my copper is in my body. So if that's of interest to you guys, if you're tired, groggy, and not feeling too well, it could be a copper deficiency. So check that podcast out and check Morley's book out as well. I just want to give a huge shout out to Red Pill Media just for making all of these stuff happen. We have contacted each other through the past couple of weeks, and they're bringing people onto the podcast that are very impactful, spreading knowledge, and it's very exciting. And the best way that you could help Red Pill Media out is in November. There's an expo in Oklahoma. I'll have all the details below, where a lot of these people are actually going to be at this expo, and you can meet them, talk to them, and just it's like-minded people trying to make the United States a better place, and not only the United States, but the world. But tonight's guest is a very interesting guest. It's someone that I think I wish I would have found her a long time ago, because Talk Junkies has had many podcasts about the subject we're going to talk about tonight. And she's actually wrote a book on it. It's called One Idea to Rule Them All. And her name is Michelle Stiles. Michelle, thank you for joining Talk Junkies. How you doing?
Thank you, Paul. Thank you for having me. I'm really glad to be here tonight and having a great chat with you and your audience.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I do this to everyone, but just tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, no, strange path. I just saw some local corruption, and it was a very small anthill, and thought, geez, it was all through that particular entity, and so I just thought, wow, what? This is about 2008, and I said, I can't imagine what Washington D.C. is like, given my experience with that, and so, anyways, in my mind, something came into my head, and I said, I'm just going to start looking up propaganda, and I'm sort of an autodidact where I just roll with something, and if I like it, I just keep going, and I'm still going, I'm still learning more, so it's really awesome and exciting. But anyways, that's how I got into it. But my background is actual physical therapy, and so it's a weird juxtaposition, but I suppose there's stranger things, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. In physical therapy, that's a wide range of things. That's from all the way from the neck down to the feet, I assume.
Yes. Well, yeah, you treat the whole person, and also do some alternative nutrition stuff. But but this is my it's been my sort of a vocation for, I did the first draft in 2018, and I actually put it aside. I didn't really think, I thought if I could write something that maybe moms could help their kids learn, would be really helpful. And then when 2020 rolled around, I really knew I had to write it. And between those 2 years that in the interviewing period, more stuff had occurred to me, and I'm like, oh, I got to add this, and so it was just coming in, to me in a different way, and so I finished it. I got it live at 2022.
Okay, and you had a pretty good feedback on it, or pretty good, right when it launched.
Yeah, right. I know. I mean, I didn't. Where do you start to advertise or marketing? And so I just sent it out to people like you, podcasters or whatever, and people that I knew in the alternative media space, and got one on Mercola's desk, Dr. Mercola, and he called me. So that really launched it, because he's got a mailing list of 1 million people. So it went out on his list, and he also used it for another article. But he said to me, it was funny. He said, I never read books sent to me.
That's wild. Yeah. I definitely tried to reach out to him during the, 2020 season. And so many people tried to reach out to him. I could only imagine. So where does it all begin with like propaganda? So like, I know like when we were talking before the podcast, you were going to get into something that probably is going to explain to me that I'd never really thought of before. And like, just real quick, for like my eyes of propaganda, if correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like there was the Smith-Mundt Act or something of the other back in the early 1900s or what have you, where the government wasn't allowed to perpetuate propaganda to its people, right?
Right.
So and then correct me if I'm wrong. Barack Obama almost revised that or get rid of that in 2008 or something
Yeah,
like that.
he pretty much did, but it didn't really matter because there was an investigation about 13 years after that, and I don't know the exact date, but I'm thinking it's along the lines of maybe the early 20s or so, probably after the war, because there was a lot of backlash with the war. And but it didn't matter. There's a little book here. This is a great little book. I don't know if you can see it. Okay, but I was just reading this the other night, and basically there was a committee where they were saying they just in the line they would just write something else like, office assistant, secretary, press person. They just didn't say public relations. They just didn't use the word, but there were plenty of them, and they were invading the government space.
Okay.
Early on.
Okay.
Yeah. So that didn't stop anybody, even though we think that it did.
Gotcha. So it's just something for me to say, like, whenever I say those types of things, I can blame it on Barack Obama for getting rid of the Smith-Mundt Act. And that's why we have all this massive propaganda. It's Barack Obama's fault. Essentially,
I wouldn't say that at all.
Okay. I feel like
that propaganda was alive and well throughout our system for 125 years.
No, for sure. I completely agree. So no matter even what the act was, it was still going on.
Yeah, exactly.
But technically illegal for the government to do, but they were finding ways around, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay.
They just didn't name it that and then called it something else, and on they went.
Okay.
So it's almost as lawless back there as it is now.
Oh, 100%.
That's what shocked me. When I did, historical research and stuff, I'm like, oh my God. You know what I mean? We just don't know our history. I mean, I didn't, certainly there may be plenty of other people that did, but I was just amazed to find the corruption in the political system, and just the news media as well. Like you could take there's about 5 or so books that just blow up the news media at the turn of the century, right? Like Ferdinand Lundberg's Imperial Hearst. It's about William Randolph Hearst. There's George Marion, A Free Press, A Portrait of a Monopoly. There's some Oswald Villard, of course, George Seldy's, Upton Sinclair's Brass Check. Now, you could read any one of those, and they just blow up the press as being completely corrupt at that time, right? So it's not like a lot of people 2016 and fake news, and people really started getting upset about the news, or more upset. I mean, there's always been people who've seen through it, but more of the majority got enlightened. But it's been they've been really an ally of the propagandists from the early 1900s, from my research.
And so it was probably more so the people who owned the press back then in those times, like J.P. Morgan, the Rockefellers, or was it just more smaller people, or was it those people with wealth and power?
Well, I mean, they all hobnobbed with them, right? And then the advertising came from corporations and finances, so they could pull advertising. They had a rogue voice. They just would say, "Hey, General Electric, take off the advertising for this guy," right? And so the little guys eventually got consolidated, like in anything, right? All the industries, and so they played different sides, they played different tunes, just like we have now, but they were pretty much allies with the powers that be.
So and then it even goes further back, I'm sure, into the 1800s. So this has just been a well-oiled machine for such a long time. And we think back then in like the 1800s that, man, it was just so different and there was no technology. But I think that's kind of completely the opposite. These people knew what they were doing, and they had a long vision plan, long term, and we're seeing it into fruition right now.
Yeah, it's amazing, really. You just. There's a lot that can go on in 125 years. I mean, and especially because you have the veneer of, I think, democracy up. But that's another whole can of worms to open. But yeah.
So kind of just give us a little bit of just like the start of the book and what your not goal, or what the knowledge is that you're trying to spread in your book.
Well, in my book, I cover 4 guys. I use them. I call them, lovingly the 4 godfathers of propaganda. It goes way back, and into Britain, for sure, coming here. But they symbolize the different areas. So Gustave Le Bon, The Crowd: A Study of the Popular Mind, which I'm sure you've probably been into already. he wrote in 1898, and he stood on the precipice of the 20th century and said, the divine right of kings is over. We're going to have to figure out a new control system for the people, right? So at that time, as you can recall, in the 1800s, a lot of the things that were percolating into the consciousness of the people was the origin of species, and so it was breaking apart that Judeo-Christian heritage, right? And so they could no longer say, well, God, I'm the anointed ruler. God, gave me the anointing, and you have to follow me. And the people would, right? And so they said that's going away, and we better find out, a way to control the people because it's eat or be eaten. So he says specifically in that book, it's a theory book, and I call him the theoretician, right? He says specifically that we're not using facts and reason anymore. Okay, we're not. He just says, and Bernays says it as well, right? And he says we're using these things, and then he goes into, it's not a big book, but he goes into a smattering of things that I looked at, I read a couple times, and I just said, what are the categories here? Because if he's saying something and it actually works, it was translated into 19 languages. Maybe he's saying something true about human nature, actually true about human nature. You know what I mean? That they can use as a lever. And so I created what this, let's see if I can see this, the infrastructure of belief.
Yep.
Does it come up okay?
It does, yeah. Okay.
So in the middle is experience. And that's the main thing that can change your mind on stuff, right? But let me just first explain the whole thing. These are shortcuts for coming to know things in a community of trust. All right. So you trust your eyes, you trust experts, you trust what others are doing and saying, and that's the bottom triangle here, right here. And that's the main way. Like if you can't come to know something, if you can't figure it out, what are you going to do? You're going to look at experience. You're going to see your past experience. You're going to go to authorities, and then you're going to look around and say, well, what's everybody else thinking and doing, And the top two are trust your culture, and then trust the hierarchy of value in words. And that's a little bit clunky, but those two things, your culture is like telling the story, and the words is the language you use to tell the story. And we use all those in those other three triangles. Okay?
Okay.
So this works really good because you can't learn everything about everything, right? So you have to have shortcuts. You're like, what should I think about this? Well, I'm going to just go here, right? But as soon, and you gotta remember, in the Civil War era, or even into parts of the early 1900s, people's worlds were about 50 to 100 miles, right? The railroads are just starting to take over, and everybody wasn't using them yet, right? So the world is still pretty small, and you can vet those people in your kind of homogenous, small little communities, okay? So this actually is really adaptive and works really well, okay? There isn't a lot of, if there's a snake oil salesman that comes along, people sniff him out pretty quick, and he's out down the road. He's got to go to another community because it just doesn't work, But with technology, okay, these are like levers on a dial, right? And you can use these things and actually synthetically manufacture them, okay? So for example, Bernays is the author. He's my second godfather, okay? Edward Bernays I call the practitioner, and he boasted of what he called stagecraft. Are you familiar with that?
I don't think I am.
Okay. So he basically said to budding PR professionals, he said, you're going to have to figure out what news looks and feels like, because you're going to make news, right? So if you're familiar with the Torches of Freedom campaign, which was where he had his secretary and a couple debutantes dress up and go in the Macy's Easter Parade, and at a certain point, he made sure that there were cameramen. They pulled up their skirts, pulled some cigarettes out, and then smoked torches of freedom. Now, at that point, you were kind of not a good girl if you were smoking, right? But they were advocating for smoking. It was part of his campaign. So it got, lots of attention and plastered all over the media, right? And which is what he wanted, because he was working for Philip Morris, to get people to smoke. So that's what he called stagecraft. So it's staged news. It's inorganic, right? It's meant to look authentic. Like, here are these people, they're just gathered together, they got this unction, and they wanted to show the world that they wanted to be equal to men and be able to smoke. And so it stirred up things in the population and got things going. But that's what he calls stagecraft, right?
Yeah.
And so he gives it another example, and he says, politicians of the future aren't going to argue like about tariffs. Okay, they're not gonna bring an argument. Like Lincoln and who was the other guy? Who was the guy that they debated? Douglas, right? They debated for 3 hours on a subject. You know what I mean? You're not gonna do that anymore, right? Here's what you're gonna do. Let's say you want to lower tariffs on wool coming into the country. All right, you're gonna, in one section of the country, have some elite businessman boycott wool by going to their business, a prominent event in cotton suits. Okay, so that gets plastered all over the news. Again, it's sort of a fabricated event, right? There aren't real people. They're getting paid to do this, right? Through the PR guys. Then somewhere else, there's maybe just middle-class people protesting in front of a wool shop, right? Somewhere else in the country, there's a social worker who you've paid to do a study of the poor and find that the poor are freezing because they don't have wool blankets, or they can't afford them, and they can't afford wool socks, right? And so what he's doing is he's planting experience, because you receive that as experience, right? It's like, oh, look at these things happening in the culture, and it must be that wool's too expensive. We need something done about it. Only then does the politician, whether it's the president or whoever it is, step into the ring and then solve the problem. Okay, so it's part of that problem, reaction, solution, right, that everybody talks about.
Okay,
Does that make sense?
Yeah, so real quick, who's the first guy again, one more time?
Gustave Le Bon.
Gustave Le Bon. So is he kind of like the original OG Godfather when it comes to what you're about, in your book? He's like the OG.
Yeah, I mean, if you read that, it is so current. It is so
right.
current.
But I'm trying to find like the origins of it, and maybe that's not even possible, because in order for him to see it, and I'm almost curious how they fine-tuned that dial that you talk about in the early 1900s, when technology wasn't even close to being at what it is today. I mean, I guess it would be easier in these communities, like you said, because you could vet people. Okay. But like, how did they figure out the human being? Are we that simple?
Well, I know, right? Let me just say, Britain was working on this. Okay. I think it comes out of Great Britain. But let me read you a quote by this guy. Are you familiar with Graham Wallace?
I've heard of him, yeah.
Okay, so he wrote this book, Human Nature and Politics, in 1908, and but he was a social psychologist. He was a Fabian socialist, and you're probably familiar with those guys. The coat of arms is a wolf in sheep's clothing, right? Yep. And so he, hung around with Beatrice Webb and H.G. Wells and those guys, all right, Huxley. So he was also closely identified with the London School of Economics. So he was a big player in London. And actually, Walter Lippmann, one of my other godfathers, he went over and worked with him for a year. We don't really know what he did, but I'm sure he was learning this in some ways, because he's a big propagandist. Okay, so so this is Graham Wallace. He says, popular election, it is said, may work fairly well as long as those questions are not raised which cause the holders of wealth and industrial power to make full use of their opportunities. But if the rich people in any modern society thought it worth their while, in order to secure a tariff, legalize a trust, or oppose a tax, to subscribe a third of their income to a political fund, no Corrupt Practices Act yet invented could prevent them from spending it. Now, that was something they had tried in Great Britain. If they did so, this is spend the money, there is so much skill to be bought, and the art of using skill for the production of emotion and opinion has so advanced that the whole condition of political contests would be changed for the future. No existing party, unless it enormously increased its own fund or discovered some other new source of political strength, would have any chance of permanent success. To me, this is the quote of the century.
Yeah,
this is my vote for the quote of the century, the 20th century. Because this is, he's saying in 1908, if the rich want something, the holders of wealth, there's so much skill in propaganda of using our techniques. Now, they might not exactly be what I'm proposing, I'm not, going to say that, but they knew how to dial people in. And so that was pretty astounding, when I found that quote. I was like, holy cow, because I was like, the war really launched it as a full-scale demonstration project, right? The war here in the States. There was some things going on, but it didn't have a lot of traction behind it. And that's my third. See, you're doing a great job. You're just whirling this right in. My third godfather is George Creel, who was the head of the Committee on Public Information. So we have the theorist, Laban, we have the practitioner and visionary, really, Bernays, because he saw where it could go. And then Creel, the practitioner, who basically fleshed it out in a really, really good. I always think that they said, well, let's think. What's the hardest test we can make to see if our system works, right? Is for me to convince you, when you don't want to go into a war. It's like Europe. This guy in Indiana is just doing his farm, and what do I want to go to Europe for? I mean, I barely know anything about it. What's going on over there? If I can get that person to give their blood and treasure, right, when they're kind of opposed to it to begin with, and it was an overwhelming success. They used $6.6 million in that effort. And there was a lot of backlash at the end of the war, but anyways, they clearly showed it overwhelmingly worked.
Yeah, just dividing people to where, they probably had more people that were for it than were against it, because they know how to fine tune it to what they wanted to. But yeah, I could see that. It's just they used money to use propaganda to make people. For which war was it?
World War I.
Okay, yeah. In those times, so that's newspaper, and then that's word of mouth mainly, and just that's crazy.
Well, poster boards, and and then they use, in addition to the propaganda they used for the war, they used public relations for 4 different Liberty Loan campaigns. They pulled 18 million out of the population to fund the war. So, nice, right? You boys are gonna go fight in it. We're gonna sit on the sidelines, make money, and you're gonna secure our loans for the Allies. But that wouldn't go over really well. So you couldn't use that line. Right. Obviously being sarcastic here, but so that's, you asked me. This is a long-winded answer to your question. How do I lay the book out? And so I kind of go through each of these guys and their contribution, right? And then Walter Lippmann was the journalist. So you have to put the news in there, the news piece, But one of the things that I think you can kind of explain, if you want to go back to this and use an example like coronavirus, okay? And I'll kind of show how I think it works in coronavirus. So, and let me just say a few things about experience. Is seeing is believing, right? And so that's why TV is so incredibly powerful, because we see and we think that's real, right? And so you're watching TV in coronavirus. I think probably the whole world saw that image in China of the man writhing on the ground and the guys in hazmat suits.
Oh, yeah.
Right? I mean, I think literally everybody in the world, right? So so that starts it off, and it's like, oh my God. Then you see the draconian lockdown, right? Just, these checkpoints and everything like that. You think, oh, well, that's China, it's way over there, and then the next visual thing is we zoom in on Italy, and there's, morgues and more dead bodies and overflowing hospitals. Okay. Then you zoom in on New York, and same thing, similar visions, right? And I'm saying, to me, you had most people by then.
Oh, for sure.
Because 3 countries, right? Seeing is believing. I've seen it in China, and they couldn't be like making anything up, and not that it's a made up thing, but not to get into that, but they could. It has to be absolutely real and as deadly as they said. Now, if you didn't, maybe you're a little standoffish. you would appeal to authorities, right? So you had the three-letter agencies toted across the thing. If you still were suspicious of them, because you were suspicious of regulatory agencies, you might have trusted Trump, right? Well, he would know the inside deal there, right? And he would let us know if there was something weird about it, you know? And then if you didn't trust him, you might have trusted science, right? Or if you didn't trust science, you might have trusted your doctor who just said to you, you got to have it, Paul, you know? And if you're still wondering and looking around, you go, well, everybody's getting this thing, or everybody's getting the vaccine, you know what I mean? It's like, and if you came and said to somebody like, did you know that they broke the control arm? Like Pfizer broke the control arm, for the trials, and there's a 2-decade history of mRNA products failing and not even getting pressed. I mean, they look like you had 3 heads, right? Because they have this wall of impenetrability. It's like, well, I've been using this my whole life, and this can't be conned. This can't be gamed, hacked. You know what I mean? You're the crazy. So that's just those 3 points. Now, if you bring the story, the narrative being told, right? So that's what trust your culture is. So the narrative was, you're the hero, 2 weeks to flatten the curve. You know what I mean? That mythological hero story is how they use that. Or they used the Judeo-Christian story, which was like, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. You can't bring a virus and kill Granny at somebody else's house or at church or whatever. So they really played on that. And then finally, how they used words, and you've probably been over and over this, 4 different definition changes, right? A pandemic was changed. The vaccine itself definition was changed. A definition of a case, because I'm, never in the history of the world is an asymptomatic person considered a case, right? And then deaths, right? What a death by COVID is, right? So they had to change 4 different definitions, or switch them, flip them on us, unbeknownst to us, to gin up the severity of the.
But the thing is, like, I don't even think it matters. Like, they're so good at it, you know what I'm saying? Or what they've done to the population through this mass propaganda campaign has dumbed majority of the people down so much that I don't even think they had to change the definition for any of those 4 things. You know what I'm saying? Because you would get with these people, and it just didn't matter. It could be right in front of them, and it was just already hook, line, and sinker. It doesn't matter what anyone says. Like, they're already in belief of what's going on.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, like you say, part of it is the dumbing down over time. But you can take this back. Like, for example, I give an example in my book of the campaign, and we don't get the veil removed very often. But there was an associate of Bernays who wrote a book about the Guatemala propaganda campaign. Are you familiar with that?
A little bit, but probably not.
All right. So this is where, way back then they were using these techniques, right? So, and this is where government and they have all the pieces that they need. So this is what I call the problem solution, and this thing is like the software program, okay? And when they get, you're probably not going to be able to see this, but they need certain pieces of hardware in a democracy. They need to control the news. They need to control the headwaters of the news, which is the Associated Press, and we're probably not going to even talk about that, okay? And they need to be able to control politicians, at least the main ones, right? When they get that hardware, where the money people control this, okay? They run the software programs here, okay? And so you need both. Now, this is how this works together. So you have Bernays. Well, let's start with United Fruit. So United Fruit owns most of the island. I mean, that's where they get the term Banana Republic, right? Joseph Arbenz becomes president, and he's going to make some reforms for his people, thinking that actually he had some power. And Washington's like, the United Fruit people, like, we're not giving them land, and we're not raising their wages and whatever. So Allen Dulles was in the CIA at that point. He had been a lawyer for United Fruit in the past. His brother was in the Secretary of Treasury, Foster Dulles, right? And Bernays, United Fruit hired Bernays to run the campaign. So what he did is he created an experience. So he had to get the journalists on board. So he gave them a junket down to Guatemala. It was carefully staged, right? That they would talk to the people he wanted them to talk to. They saw parts of the island that he allowed them to see, right? And so that the people would all go back and say that Arbenz was a threat, a communist threat. And before we know it, if we let this guy carry on, he's going to have Soviet, they're going to be Soviet missiles that are, right down at our southern border, right? Or not border, but you know what I mean. So anyway, so they come back from the junket and they dutifully start writing this in the press. Edward Bernays at that point makes a front group called Middle American Association, and they look like they're independently saying the same thing, right? But it's a front group. They have the ambassador switched out because he's not going along with the nonsense that he sees, right? So they get some guy that will tote the line. They have a conference of Central America where they basically tell Nicaragua and Costa Rica, look, you're going to go along with this and say he's a communist threat, or we're going to pull our funding for you guys, right? And so they do, and so they weave this illusion that Arbenz is a communist threat. So then CIA helps dispose of Arbenz, and United Fruit goes on running its banana republic. So that's where you have to have the hardware. Now, once that's, you really infected the government at that point, right? You're using it almost symbiotically or parasitically for your own interests, right?
That's disgusting.
Right. It is disgusting, right? And you could go back even further. Another example that I uncovered after my book was it pertains to the Fed. So the bankers wanted to get a central bank, of course. So they created the panic of 1907, just so that it was fresh at everybody's mind how painful it is to have these banks go belly up. So that's your experience. Okay. Oh my God. So there it is. We need a central bank. Problem.
And
right?
just real quick, I just want to just add to that. Just they tried to do this multiple times in the 1800s, and it failed every time, and everyone burned down the banks.
Okay. So anyways, so that Al Crozier wrote U.S. Currency versus Corporate Currency. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he was valiantly trying to fight against the bank. So he did a blow by blow. He was a lawyer. He did it like, hey, here's section of 1A of the Aldrich plan, right? And he said, this is what it's going to be able to do. Here's in layman's language what it's going to be able to do. And it's like, oh my God, you're kidding me. And he goes, I could own the United States land and everything on it in 10 years if you gave me this power. All right. So he's fighting against it, but he has no traction, right? So what do? The bankers, they create a front group called the National Citizens League for the promotion of sound banking. And the bylaws stated that you could only have Midwestern bankers because they know that they're not trusted. They're total snakes. Everybody knows it. And they have to use the authority. They borrow the authority of Midwestern bankers who are now saying through the front group that they're funding that we need a central bank. And I just landed on this in the New York Times, but there's an article that shows how extensive this front group was. $500,000 in 1911, okay, went into this. 42 chapters they paid for salaried people in 42 chapters in each state. There were only 42 states at the time. They did bulk messaging to the populace. They dumbed it all down, right? They did regional messaging. They had experts say, why the regional bank would help the southeastern farmers versus the northeasterners. Okay, they had a treetop campaign to the intelligentsia, right? I mean, they did segment, and they even said in the Times article that they would play up. They would have an audience that thought that the bankers caused the panic, and they would play that up, like they were, getting identified with them, and to tell them that, but we're gonna do a central bank that isn't attached to the bankers, and so they had, when you go back to Wallace's statement in 1908, right? This was 1911. You're like, where did they get this from, right? Like I said, it came from probably back over in Britain, but it was, it brings to understandings like if you have all the money in the world and the organizations, there's only three organizations that can has that kind of money. One, the government, nonprofit organizations, and profit organizations, which are corporations, right? So if you have that kind of disparity in getting your ideas out, like you have this idea marketplace, and you and I can't spend $500,000. You know what I mean? Here's Al Crozier, he's selling his book, he's giving it away, he's doing some speeches, but he's one guy, just like you and I are now, right? So it inherently destroys the marketplace of ideas in a republic, right? I mean, they're going to win, as Wallace said. He boasted. He said basically, if they want what they want, they can get, because they're going to put these campaigns on it. And you know what, Paul? An interesting thing is, like, the most invisible people in our society are PR people.
Yeah.
I mean, can you even name a group?
No.
Right? WPP, Intergroup, and of course then they have the nested philosophy, like Nabisco, and then there's 80 companies underneath that. You know what I mean? So they have this sort of thing where there's lots of variety, but there's not. But it's like a $1 trillion industry. Before this, I could have named Hill and Knowlton as one, but that's it. And those people, they have really vanilla names like WPP, or banker, like lawyer names, and so they don't want people to know who they are. I mean, I'd love to audit those files.
Oh, for sure. So.
Yeah.
How can you see past some of this stuff? I know because in the book you talk about reversing propaganda, and I know that's probably a whole nother side that we'll get into. I mean, we have limited time, and it's already going by so fast.
Wow.
But what is there anything that happens naturally then at that point? Because it seems like anything that's on the national media scale is going to be influenced by people with money that's to their interest. Especially when you have a population of 350 million or 400 million, whatever it really truly is. It seems like they have their hands in everything.
Yeah, I mean, I think that they, to me, when I look back and I saw how, like, I felt like we lost our country a long time ago.
For sure.
You know what I mean? And that needs to be really recognized by people, because they're under this illusion, that we make America great again. It's like, dude, it's been a shell company for them for about, at least 75 years. You could argue that JFK was the outward, we own this thing, right? We're the mob, we're inside, you know what I mean? Because nobody ever got caught, right? They just went scot-free. But your question was, again,
how do you know
is there anything that's
natural? Yeah.
Okay, so to go back to the internet, so when they open up the internet, that technology, they know what they're doing. They're not surprised. I mean, they're giving us a platform to speak the truth, And prior to that, they could just like Mark Lane had to go to Europe to get his book. Mark Lane, who wrote about the Kennedy assassination, to go to Europe to get it published. He had a complete blackout of his book. So they had that power, and then they opened up the internet. So they're not stupid. They know what they're going to do. To me, the reason they did that was basically so that you and I would create a dossier on ourselves for free. What a thing, right? Everybody creates their own dossier. We gather up all the information, and then we close down the net when we want it, when we need to, right? And I think part of what they're doing now is they're using a kind of a pincer movement. One side is they're going to censor, for the good of the democracy, because we're destroying democracy with our propaganda. And then on the other side, I think they're just going to, how like a horse tramples in water and nobody can drink it, right? It just muddies it up. I mean, I think, once they unleash AI throughout the internet, I don't know if you're real, Paul.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's just going to be like, I don't know. So what are you going to do? You can't test them. You can't vet them. And so you're going to probably just move off the platform. But we're going back to the dark ages then, almost, because we really don't have networks. So, I mean, it's urgent that we get off their platform in a way and find other means of communication. you know?
Oh, you're not wrong. That's really interesting because they have us right where they want us because we need this to communicate. You're right. And I think that's a really important thing that you said right there is just like-minded people like us where I think we're, in my opinion, fighting the good fight. That's truly what I
Yeah.
believe. I feel like I know what right and wrong is, and a lot of these things that I see as wrong, it got to the point like where I said about my two friends that used to do the podcast with me, they're like, Paul, we just can't come over there anymore. It's so dismal what we talk about each and every single week when it comes to like this. I mean, we had good conversations, nice, good podcasts that were heart-filled, don't get me wrong. But that is very important what you're saying. Sorry, it's very of the utmost importance to do something like that. But then you think about it, when we do create that, we're going to be considered domestic terrorists. You know what I'm saying? Like that's just the even scarier part about it too. And then they'll have their propaganda to perpetuate to the people on why this is a bad movement.
Right. Which is what they infiltrate every movement, and they've got themselves. And the internet is not a surprise. They've seeded. I mean, so they control their publications, right? All the, the book publishing and the magazine publishing and the newspapers and all that, and of course the media, TV landscape. But they are also really spending. I think they're spending trillions. They're sitting on trillions, right? They're sitting on trillions. So they can throw money at social media influencers, and anytime there's a crack in a truth crack, let's put it that way, truth crack in the narrative, they can get a person in there, spend a lot of money elevating them, getting likes, shares, etc. Because you know how to do that marketing, right? And elevate them so that they take all the oxygen in the room. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
So many people are not authentic that we think are our friends.
Well, and I almost think like for instance, like Joe Rogan has the biggest podcast, and for the longest time he was a moon denier and that we never went, and then like for some reason he talked to Neil deGrasse Tyson and then he changed his mind, which every person is entitled to do that. I'm not saying that that's not the case, but I almost feel like sometimes like he does say a lot of good things, and maybe not necessarily that he's naive to what's going on, but maybe he just doesn't care and he just wants to spread his own knowledge in his own way. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but
yeah. It's hard to say, and you could spend 100 hours, you know what I mean, researching different things. You have to be smart about your time, obviously creating networks, and I think the other thing too is to recognize that this thing has power, and I we just ripped through this time, Paul.
I know.
There was one thing I was gonna kind of share with it, is that it kind of comes back. The people that have money are the corporate financial people. They're everywhere. They're behind every door you look. Whoop, there you are. Whoa, there they are over there. And when you're inserting your will on people, it's manipulation. You want to manipulate. I mean, just like you said, it was disgusting when we were talking about that one example of them just what they did to our Benz and the whole 9 yards. They're just getting people to go kill themselves in Flanders Field. I mean, I should have the right to know what's true about the world, so I don't do that, right? So there's a element to it, to me, that is like, in a sense, Luciferian. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
It's a dark art, right? And there's power to it. And we give power to it by actually, I think, coming into that worship of money, right? And that idolatry of capitalism. Of course, we haven't had capitalism in years. It's predatory, monopolistic, you can't even almost call it capitalism. I mean, there's no competition in it, right? They've gamed the whole system. But to the extent that we tie into that, we're feeding power into that whole system. You see people, well, I can't do anything because I'm going to lose my job. Or I can't do anything because there's this thing where we're tied into it. We're really tied into it. And it's hard.
I completely agree. You almost feel lost at some points. And I think like the coolest thing about doing a podcast, and again, like you say, it's networking, and I've met a lot of cool people in doing this for the past 6.5 years. And I always bring this gentleman up all the time. His name's Pat Holland, and he's started a grassroots movement in Missouri. So it's nonprofit They don't accept any donations. They don't take any money, so that they can't be considered a lobbyist and that they're leaning one way or another. And I think that is, a breath of fresh air, and there is little hope in local politics. And I'm not saying with having Pat on, we found out in Missouri specifically that, there's been a power shift a few years ago, a transfer of power to the Speaker of the House, where in the House, the Speaker of the House, if they don't want a piece of legislation heard, they just say no. So at that point, I'm like, man, I feel really deflated. But the good things that have come out of the grassroots movement is Pat goes there every year that they're in session, and he brings 50 to 60 people, and next year it might be 80, and you know what I'm saying, or 100, and he's gathering more steam. And when he goes in there, he has not influence, but they know who he is, and he's just a citizen. You know what I'm saying? He doesn't have to run for office. He's not a Republican. He's not a Democrat.
Right.
And he was a big proponent, him and his movement, of why Missouri is the freest gun state in all 50 states. The Second Amendment Preservation Act, which we don't comply with federal gun regulations. So if Kamala Harris becomes president and she bans assault rifles, Missouri won't comply with it. And that was like 3 years ago, and now all good things come to an end, because now it's being fought in the 6th District Court in Missouri, where they're saying it's unconstitutional for us to have said that we voted this in and we want this. And I don't think they actually thought it was going to pass, and it did. But now it's caught up in the court. So I don't know. It's very demonic, like you say, and it's like they got it's just pulsating and it doesn't stop.
Yeah, exerting your will over people is it's one thing to say, well, I want my own will, in relationship to God. It's another thing to exert your power over other people so that you get them to do what you want them to do and move in the way that you want them to move. And so, to me, when people said, it's almost like people have a spell cast over them.
Yep.
Right. With coronavirus, you couldn't, you know what I mean? But it's because of years of this. To me, it's simple. You don't have to get juju like psyop. I get why people want to do that, but it just, to me, is a lot. I mean, they just use this over and over again, and what they're doing on a, like, people use a lot of psychological terms, but like I woke up the other day with the 3Ds in my mind. They distract us, they demoralize us, and they divide us. Now that's as old as the hills. But that's not some deep, psychological knowledge. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Like, it's simple. It's easy, the 3Ds. Just remember it. They're going to be doing all those things to us, while we try to fight this thing, right? And so, turning off devices and, linking up with people. Anyone they're trying to divide, go cross cultural boundaries and make a connection with somebody that they're trying to split us. You know what I mean?
And what's so weird, sorry about that, is just, I have 3 little ones, and they're 7, 5, and 2. And, when I was young, it wasn't weird to like see people and talk to them. Like, if you're going to the grocery store and you're about to get in your car and someone talks to you, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, your parents weren't freaked out by it back, 20, 30 years ago. But now it's like, it's such it's almost taboo to even do it. Like, this morning we went to the store, and like this guy like opened up his door, because I have a Jeep with no doors on. He's like, hey man, he's like, what's the JK stand for? My kids just like look at it. My 2 daughters like, who is this guy? What does he want? Like, this is so weird, And I'm not saying my kids we're trying to teach them, you know what I'm saying, within the conversation.
Right, we want to keep them safe.
Yeah, we want to keep them safe, but it's like, just even that, being in that position, it almost like not terrified them, but they were uncomfortable. You know what I'm saying? Just that this guy was wanting to have a conversation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
and so we've lost all the civic institutions, that brought us together in space, in time. And so, it's hard to make, unless you have work pals and stuff and family, it's hard to find places where people meet on a regular basis and congregate and just develop relationships and friendships community wide. And, I don't have the answer that anyone else, it's not going to look pretty, my hope though, is I love the end of the Lord of the Rings, right? That there's it looks pretty hopeless when you look at it, right? I mean, how could this possibly turn out good for us, And so you have this fellowship that bands together and says, we're gonna do something about Sauron, right? And then within like weeks or whatever, they encounter some trials, and the fellowship breaks apart, right? and one of them goes one way and the other one goes the other way. So Frodo and Sam go to behind, enter Mordor to take the ring of power, to take that thing, that wields power over everything, throw it in the fire. And the other, but it's a sheer mission of suicide to them. I mean, they're like, we're two little hobbits, we're not armed really, we're probably never going to make it, but we're going to humbly do our part, right? And then the other guys, they're like, wow, well, we don't know what's happened to them. We got to do something. Let's just distract Mordor at their front gate, which is a suicide mission. You know what I mean? We're going to go over here and we don't even know if they're alive still, but we're going to do our part, And so you have two people doing their parts, and then God intervenes. You know what I mean? But themselves, I know people, it's a very, very seductive thing. It's like, I'll do something when I'll know it's going to be successful. You know what I mean? I'm waiting for that thing that's big enough, that's going to, be have the momentum enough, or there's going to be a large enough human being who's a charismatic leader. It's not going to happen that way, I don't believe. I think it's going to be you and me doing what we feel called to do, even though it seems maybe sheer insanity or at the cost of our lives or livelihood, and enough people doing that across the world, you know?
Yeah. And like you said, like if we all just stopped giving into the system, that's as easy. It's that easy, but it's more complicated than we could ever imagine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is that's the most insane part to me. I think it's because of propaganda and comfortability, what they've developed in this, in this special way that they did it. And again, they have this foothold, and it's, we talked about it a lot here on the podcast years before. It's just like, you poke the bear until, you notice it changes a little bit, and they're like, okay, they'll step back a little bit and like, okay, they're not quite ready for this yet. Like they have it down to a science. It's just, I don't know.
Yeah. But I think at this point, it's just almost parody now.
Yep.
Because we're going into the end times, and it's not even meant to convince us. Do you know what I mean? I don't think, but I think it's so outrageous, that you would run a decrepit, demented man. You know what I mean? It's
right.
It's in your face. You can't do a thing about it.
So
what are you going to do?
Right. So within your research, I know, like, we know, like, the big names, allegedly these are the people, and I had the pleasure of bringing David Icke on one time, and I know,
oh, cool.
Yeah, and YouTube, it was up on YouTube for years, and then I think it was once COVID happened. It was during COVID when we had the conversation, and he had mentioned something about it. We never even went deep into it. We talked about who is they, you know what I'm saying, type of podcast. And they took it down, of course, so it still exists out there. It's on BitChute and some other platforms, and I think it's still on Spotify. But I think, like, my biggest question is, and I'm not suggesting you have the answer. I'm just curious, is who is they? Like, these people, like these high people, because we know Biden and Kamala aren't running the show. We know that. No. We know that. But so who is it? Like, are there any type of names that you've came across, like, through your research?
Well, like even when the universities now are labeling the financial complex the transnational system and the transnational capitalist class, right? The investment firms, BlackRock, Vanguard, those guys, the central bankers, as to who really controls behind the scenes, I don't think they probably show their face, but definitely the banking corporations now. I mean, Vanguard and BlackRock have their voting stock in all the corporations. And I mean, like I tell people, it's like, why do you think they're going into transgender? Why do you think Bud Light, besides the fact that they pretty much have a monopoly on beer, it's like, well, go drink Modelo, we own that too, Yeah. It doesn't matter. But it's supposed to affect their bottom line, but they're still wading into social issues, which they would never do. That's an anathema for corporations to do it. It's because it trickles down to the finances. We're going to demoralize them. We're completely demoralizing them. We're in the end game, right? And you're going to just go out and be in their face with this stuff because we know that they hate it. You know what I mean? Put it out there, and we're stealing your kids. We're robbing your kids right now. I mean, of the precious thing that you could possibly have, we're going after that. We just don't care. And I think the corporations, the multinationals, they're just really owned by the financing behind them. You know what I mean? And steered that way. I think most of those CEOs, they just get a lot of money $35 million or whatever it is, to do the dirty work, like, allow killing protocols in the hospitals. And you get a pat on the back and a hanger for your airplane, right? I mean, it's dirty work. I don't think they're really running much. Do you know what I mean?
Right. So have you been to a Red Pill Expo before?
No.
Okay. Yeah. I don't. Morley was. I talked to him last week, and I think he said this will be his first too. And I'm almost just having these two conversations. You're the second person I've done the podcast with Red Pill Media, and it's like I got to be there. I got to go to Oklahoma when it goes, because this is that networking that you're talking about. This is the event where people get together of like mind to try and help spread knowledge and make the world a better place.
Yeah, I mean, we've got to connect on, the lesser people, not necessarily the bigger names. You know what I mean?
Right.
We've got to create a network of no names, if you will. You know what I mean? And just start somewhere. Like your friend that you talked about in Missouri. You just started somewhere, and make it work. Start sharing things. I've even thought of, if I had a different situation right now, is of like getting an old printer. Because I want to have the ability, if things go down cyber, to do like the old pamphleteers, right, from Thomas Paine. People, if things go down, you've got to have a way to get to communicate. And so, I mean, it sounds crazy probably, but I'm old school at heart. So, yeah. Anyways.
Yeah. No, I'm glad to have found you, and I'm glad to have had a conversation. We're a little bit. I think we're close to the end of the hour, and. I love doing this. I love having conversations and doing podcasts like this, because it's just, I've always wanted to talk about propaganda, but like just to have someone on who has an insight like you do, it's just, it amazes me, and it's just like, you think, I'm never suggesting that I think I know it all, but just after talking to hundreds of people, you're like, what else is there out there that could be new? And then I have a conversation with you, Michelle, and it's just all this new information. So thank you very much for that.
Cool. Well, anyways, the book is, that was just the first part of it, and there's more. But I use a lot of examples. I try to make it. I didn't use COVID in the book because I didn't want it to get banned. You know what I mean? Right. I just wanted to keep it in it, and I don't go right or left. I mean, I steer straight down the middle as much as I can, using some leftist, rightist examples, and I just try to make it as simple as I can, and acceptable to the most people, so that I can, if I can reach, so many people and turn their minds in a different way, what they see, they can actually start to read the tea leaves. And the other thing I did was I created a study guide to go with it, because it's not something that, you want me to teach your kids. Like, that doesn't work. You have to do it. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so I created the study guide because that's something that's personal. That's a worldview philosophy, and that should be coming from you, is my feeling. So you can take the book and you can take the study guide side by side. And I'd say probably a teenager, high school would be an appropriate age, especially if you're homeschooling them, because they seem to be way ahead of the actual school kids. And start putting it in their mind, because they've grown up in media. I mean, I know you probably try to keep them away from it, but you know what I mean. They're so inundated. And they're, each generation's brain changes a little bit and gets hooked on that high of fast, quick, like you just said, TikTok, 30 seconds. I read books, you know what I mean? I do a little bit of research on internet, but, get them reading books, because it totally is different brain sequencing.
Yeah, no, definitely. You're not wrong. It's very true. Well, so where can people find you? Do you have a website or anything like that?
Yeah, I do. It's called smartsheep.com with an E. So Smartsheep, sheep is an Old English plural. So SHEEPE.
Okay.
Smartsheep.com. And then I have a Substack with the same name. I don't do a lot because, I still work, and there's just too much to do.
Right.
So I don't post a lot, but then I'm not into a lot of sound bites. I try to get, I'm a synthesizer. So I want to give it to people whole, so that they can see the big picture.
Well, even going through your own journey, sometimes you have to sit back and just enjoy life for what it is too. With all this great information you have, you still have to enjoy it personally.
Right. So so I can't be on there just putting things out, but there's stuff that they can get from there, and then this other grid here, and I've got lots of cool infographics. I've worked on trying to explain things as well as I can, because we don't, nobody, I mean, we don't have good materials on this, I don't think. But and then this may end up being a book. It's called Propaganda: Rise of the Beast, and where I'm showing the software, hardware, and how it works, how I think it works, anyways. But so, anyways, that might be coming.
Cool.
In the future.
Well, I would definitely, I'd love to have you on again sometime. I know you're probably busy with life and all those types of things, but I'll reach out to you here in a couple months. And there's a lot of stuff we didn't get to go over. So
sure, there's plenty. I've got lots of just other different ways to approach it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. When you have fun, like I said, it just felt like we just talked for like 10 minutes. That's all it felt like for me.
What?
I said it just felt like we only talked for 10 minutes.
You were great. You asked great questions, and boy, when time flies like that, it's fun and exciting.
Rock on, Michelle. Well, thank you for joining Talk Junkies. Thanks again, Red Pill Media, for making this happen. Any lasting words, Michelle?
No, just come out and join us at Tulsa in November, and I'd love to meet your audience and sign a book and just get into it with people. Have conversations and share what they know, and I can share my knowledge. So it's fun.
Rock on. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah. All right, Paul. Thank you.
Have a good night. Cheers. Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Michelle Stiles. Check her book out. I'm going to have a link down below where you can find her book. I highly advise reading it or buying it and getting it. I'm going to definitely do that tonight whenever I get off the podcast. I'm going to get on Amazon. I'm going to buy it right away. Thank you to all our junkies listening out there. Stay fly and ring the bell.